Testing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Delphi Economic Forum. The next panel or discussion will be with General David Petraeus, one of the, if I can use the word, great American generals with a lot of vast experience on the ground, Iraq, Afghanistan, and then add to that the experience of being the head of the CIA, which means that you have both the military and the analytical, geopolitical view. And actually, speaking of generals, we also have the former head of the Greek forces with us.
We do, and one of the great members of parliament, the former mayor of Athens right there, the former president of the University of Southern California, a great Greek American. They're all here.
So he knows Greece very, very well. Let me start with a little bit to the north, Ukraine.
Sure. Yep.
It's one of the two major wars, the major, let's say, war of our times. May I ask, be a little bit the devil's advocate and say, was it wishful thinking that it would be ending quite, quickly? And add to that the fact that a lot of analysts were talking about Russia being destroyed within a few months.
No, I think it's fair to say that in the first year of the war, we were all a little bit overly pessimistic. Not all of us, candidly. I said, I think they're going to lose the Battle of Kyiv, the Russians, and they did. Keep in mind, the Ukrainians won the battles of Kyiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Kherson, and then Kharkiv Oblast. In the first year, Ukrainians retook. The second year, we were probably a little bit overly optimistic. And I think the situation now is that we're very realistic, and that reality is sobering. I was just in Ukraine again 4 days last week, met with all of my old counterparts and all the rest of that, ministers of defense and chief of defense staff and the intel chiefs and all and so forth. And it's tough right now. So when people ask me, in fact, I was asked, foreignpolicy.com asked me to write an essay on the future of Ukraine, I said, it depends. It depends first and foremost on the resumption of U.S. assistance. This is crucial. No other grouping of countries, not all the rest of NATO, can provide the industrial strength levels of munitions, air defenses, all the rest of this the way that the U.S. can. It's taken far too long for Congress to agree on this, but I'm hopeful that next week it will be on the vote for the floor of the House. There's a bipartisan majority that supports this. It's just the curious dynamics of the majority party, which is so fragile that one person can threaten the Speaker of the House, as happened before. So I think, first, let me finish here. Second, it depends on Ukraine resolving its forced generation issues. They have a very strange conscription process. In the past, they didn't conscript until the age of 27, whereas we do it at 18 or 19 or what have you. The average age of the soldiers that General Hodges and I were privileged to command in Iraq and Afghanistan was in the 18 to 23-year-old range. In Ukraine, the average soldier on the front lines is over 40. And they have to get a force rotation policy going. They have to generate the additional forces. They passed two important laws. One drops the age of conscription to 25 from 27. The other has a variety of other features to it. That's the second really big issue, because at the end of the day, for all of the incredible fighting skills, determination, initiative, innovativeness that you see on the Ukrainian side, the cold, hard reality is that Russia has a population that is more than 3 times that of Ukraine and an economy that's more than 10 times. And it now has finally been put on a war footing. Russia will generate another 300,000 this year over the course of the year is the projection. And Ukraine hopefully will get somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000. So that's another big challenge. Then there's a variety of other factors. Europeans staying firm. They have been. It was the Munich Security Conference this year. It was unlike any other. Normally, the Munich Security Conference, the Americans are all beating up on the Europeans for not doing enough. This year, it's the Europeans beating up on the Americans for not doing enough. And again, we got to get that done in Washington this week. But I'm very confident the EU passed a 50 billion euro additional. Every individual country has been going to Kyiv and doing a bilateral security agreement and so on. And then there's the dynamic of innovativeness. The Ukrainians know that they have to have machines rather than, or in addition to men. And they've demonstrated this very impressively. Yes, they did not achieve what we hoped they would do in the counteroffensive last summer, but they have destroyed 30% of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which cannot be replaced because of the Montreux Convention, which prohibits warships going through the Bosphorus, and Turkey enforces that. And that has cleared out the Western Black Sea Fleet for Ukraine to export grain. They're almost back at what they were exporting before the latest invasion. That's hugely important for them for fiscal reasons. And again, a big success that is often overlooked. They've actually forced the Russian Black Sea Fleet to do something it hasn't in centuries, which is to largely evacuate the port of Sevastopol on Western Crimea. So again, a number of these factors, but this innovativeness piece is crucial. The Russians, sadly, have learned. They learned how to defend, very, very formidable. And they also are now using a variety of adaptations, including what are called glide bombs, where they drop a bomb 70 kilometers from the front lines and it glides. And these are very considerable ammunition. They're just pounding. You know, their method of war is they just rush essentially massive human at it, take horrible casualties, and then they back off and just destroy what's there until it becomes untenable for the defender and they creep forward a little bit further. It's interesting that Ukraine is a little bit, as one of our columnists in the Washington Post said, it's where All Quiet on the Western Front, World War I, meets Blade Runner, because you have old World War I style defenses, you have Cold War era weapon systems, and then you have very cutting edge drones and unmanned systems, not just in the air, but on the sea and even now on ground. There are even automated machine guns. The problem is they can't figure out how to have it reload itself, so a man has to go out eventually and reload it. But it's quite extraordinary. So, touch wood, America needs to get its act together and support. I believe that will happen next week. There's a major bipartisan majority that supports this. Get that pipeline filled back up. The Ukrainians get their fourth generation processes going. This year probably is one in which they're going to be on the defense. And then you see where the dynamic goes from there.
I think we both came from the US on Tuesday. And I was with friends and others during the last few weeks. And I do detect some fatigue, Ukraine fatigue. So I'm not talking about
Which is curious, because we're not doing the fighting on the front lines. If there should be Ukraine fatigue, it ought to be on the front lines, not back in Washington, but whatever.
Given the fact that the US is the superpower, and economically and militarily speaking, it's a must, as you just noted, I'm just wondering if this fatigue, which is mainly from the Republicans, but even some Dems are thinking, how much longer, how much more money. Is that a dimension that should be taken into account? Could it be open-ended?
I was not one who believed that you had to actually end endless wars. In fact, I opposed the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Yes, it was frustrating. Yes, it was maddening. Yes, our partners in Kabul were not all that we might hope they would be. We only had 3,500 troops on the ground. We hadn't lost a soldier in a year and a half. There was no reason. $25 billion and an $850 billion defense budget. So we need to be careful about this. This one, we need to ensure that Ukraine prevails when this is over. Keep in mind, the leader in the Kremlin is someone who is trying to reassemble the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. His response when he was asked, what was the worst geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, a century that included 2 world wars and the Great Depression, and he said, the dissolution of the Soviet Union. That gives you something, and he has this grievance-filled, revanchist, revisionist, and frankly, outright murderous. I'm very proud to say that I'm sanctioned by Russia, by the way. After what really hurt was that I was the runner-up for Time Person of the Year in 2007 to Vladimir Putin. This is very personal. So in any event, look, we need to help Ukraine in every way that we can, and we need to do it for as long as is necessary until the dynamic changes and they either clear Russia from the rest of their territory or some other arrangement transpires.
Wear your CIA hat. Are you worried that Russia is being pushed, in a way, in reality, closer to China?
Russia was already close to China. Remember, right before the invasion, Vladimir Putin literally hugged President Xi. and they declared a partnership without limits. So yeah, I'm concerned. I'm concerned that Iran is selling drones and possibly missiles to Russia. I'm concerned that North Korea is providing over 1 million rounds of heavy artillery ammunition to Russia. Sure, yeah, there's an alignment there. The axis of the whatever, the sanctioned by and large, and that is worrisome. And there are aspects of that, some aspects that are Cold War-ish, except that analogy I find very flawed.
And since you mentioned the Washington Post, let me turn to the other big paper in the US, the New York Times. I interviewed Tom Friedman maybe 6-7 months ago. A provocative point, but let me make it. He thought that at some point we might end up with some kind of dirty solution where part of Ukraine on the Russian side will not be what it was, if I can be as diplomatic as I can. Do you think that some kind of quote-unquote realism on that front could be the...
Yeah, look, when you're the director of the CIA, you learn pretty quickly that you have to see the world the way it is, not the way you'd like it to be. And that is certainly one of the possibilities. And you can't discount that. There's a range of possibilities. It runs all the way from Ukraine somehow developing capacity and capability that enable them to collapse the Russian defenses. Sadly, that didn't happen last summer. There are some other more worst-case scenarios as well. And we need to ensure that they do not transpire. Keep in mind, again, Russia won't stop in Ukraine. Moldova is next on the X, as you call it in my old world. And then Lithuania would probably be after that. I mean, he's mentioned Lithuania something like 40 times in a single lengthy speech. So he has greater ambitions. He's already created problems in Moldova with that grouping of forces that's left over in Transnistria from the Cold War. So no, all these are worrisome. And we need to, again, see very clearly how evil this man is. I mean, this is someone who obviously, literally, murders his opponents.
You mentioned Iran before.
Yep.
Let me move to the second, unfortunately, big war of our time in Gaza. Are you worried that we're told maybe even the next 48 hours some kind of attack might take place from Iran?
Yeah, no, look, there's a risk premium on Brent crude right now. You know, I chair the KKR Global Institute, KKR being one of the world's largest investment firms. And what we do is geopolitical risk. And the reason that Brent crude's trading over $90 a barrel is because there is a risk premium right now that is worried about the results of some kind of Iranian retaliation for the Israeli strike in the consulate in Damascus that took out 2 very senior Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force officers. There's going to have to be some kind of response. I don't think Iran wants to get into it in a big way with Israel. It certainly doesn't want to get into it with the United States. They shut down the Shia militia in Iraq after they killed 3 of our soldiers, and they never would respond directly to us. Keep in mind that when it comes to the really meaningful economic results of what's going on in the Middle East, it comes down to one big issue: freedom of navigation through the Gulf. That's where the supply of crude and natural gas comes from, and Iran wants that to be continued because they're exporting 1.6 or 1.7 million barrels of crude per day. That's their economic lifeline, and they don't want to disrupt that. That's also why they don't want to get into it directly with the United States, because they'll lose. Remember, I commanded Central Command. In fact, it's publicly known that we developed the plan to destroy the Iranian nuclear program when I was the commander of the Greater Middle East.
Still in Israel, the U.S. is the closest ally of Israel. How do you feel from the fact that the U.S. president is not able to influence the prime minister of Israel?
First of all, I think he is to some degree, perhaps not
to some degree.
Perhaps not as much as he would like. Look, let me explain my view on this. First of all, you have to understand, and I was just in Israel 3 weeks ago, met with the Minister of Defense and a number of others.
Wherever there's a war,
well,
a general has to be there.
So they sustained a trauma that I don't think anyone can really appreciate. Remember, we lost not quite 3,000 in the 9/11 attacks. This would be the equivalent in U.S. terms, because of their much smaller population, of us losing 42,000 and having another 7,000 taken hostage. So you really have to try to appreciate that. I also believe that Hamas has to be destroyed. Now, destroy in military doctrine terms means to render the enemy incapable of accomplishing his mission without reconstitution. They have nearly done that. There's about 4 of 24 battalions left that are still intact, so they still have a capacity. But the big problem is that reconstitution piece. So I agree, destroy Hamas. I agree, never allow Hamas to rule Gaza again, and I agree, obviously, get your hostages back. The challenge is that it would be really helpful if they would make a true commitment to the Palestinian people in Gaza that we're going to make your life better once Hamas is out of your ranks. That's what we did. When we were in the surge in Iraq, we went into Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul, Baquba, parts of Baghdad, and we said, your life is going to be better by what we do because we're going to get al-Qaeda out of it, we're going to gate your communities, you're going to be secure, and then we're going to rebuild everything, restore basic services, humanitarian assistance, and all the rest of it. I'd like to see that component, and the minister and I discussed this. It's very, very important. The challenge is that they don't have the force density in there right now to prevent the reconstitution, which is why they had to go back into the Al-Shifa hospital, which I believe they should have taken and secured and actually used to help the casualties. And obviously, you've got to keep civilian casualties to an absolute minimum, or you're creating the seeds of Hamas 2.0. We used to have a sign on the command post wall looking at me in these 5 combat commands that I had, and it asked the question, will this operation take more bad guys off the street than it creates by its conduct? If the answer to that is no, you're supposed to figure out how do you get to yes or not do the operation.
What's the answer in this case?
Well, they have to go into Rafah, but the way they do this is crucial. They've got to get the innocent civilians out of there. Now, you'll say, how do they distinguish between the innocent civilians and Hamas? Biometrics. The enemy gave Israel an incredible gift with all these videos and everything else that they uploaded, and Israel has mined that, and they have biometric tools that are exceptionally good. We used to use these even in Iraq days. We'd use them for ID cards. Everybody, you can't go into your neighborhood unless you actually have a US-issued ID card. And that's one of the ways that they will do it. There's a variety of other techniques as well. But they've got to get the civilians out of the way. Using large munitions in urban areas that are filled with civilians, that starts to violate that question.
Moving away from the wars and to a country that we care about, our neighbor Turkey, a major country, a NATO ally, but we have many issues. We feel threatened. These days, situation is better than it used to be. Let me ask you, first of all, how reliable an ally is Turkey? And I'm honestly not asking as a Greek.
Yeah.
But this is a discussion that's taking place in Washington.
You know, General Hodges and I learned when we were infantry officers that you should go around minefields rather than through them. But I'll sort of come up to the edge of this one. The only way to answer this question is to say, look, it's complicated. I dealt with Erdogan when I was a 4-star and also CIA director with a lot of the individuals around him. Hakan Fidan, now the foreign minister, was my counterpart when I was a CIA director and so forth. It's complicated. And we have a whole mosaic of issues that we are dealing with Turkey, the S-400, the democratic forces of northeastern Syria, which are pretty close to the PKK, but they're the ones keeping the Islamic State down. I mean, all this stuff overlaps. The Kurdish issues in Iraqi Kurdistan, and so forth and so on. We're working through those. I think occasionally you have to have a degree of patience with really, really tough problems because you don't want something to erupt. You don't want something that is, as they say, non-biodegradable. You know, it never goes away and it influences that relationship. And I think there's a time you just have to be a bit patient in that regard. And I think, again, that the relationship between Greece and Turkey is actually, I wouldn't say unprecedentedly good, but it's actually, there's some encouraging signs. There's dialogue back and forth and the rest of this. And, you know, someone did ask me the other day, I did an interview with a Greek newspaper, and they said, you know, should there be, should a country that receives F-16s have to sign that they will not attack their neighbor? And I reminded that individual that Greece is getting the F-35.
Speaking of F-35s, because Victoria Nuland, one of the last statements made was that if they end or give back or throw away, however you want to describe it, the S-400s, they being Turkey, be back on the F-35 program. Is
Well,
that
we'll see how
something-
that transpires. You know, my understanding that these things are sitting in crates. They're not even being used. It's a huge issue for, obviously, Turkey's leader. You know, how do you save face? You spend all this money on a system that you're not even using, and it prevents you from getting the top-line fighter and so forth. Give that time as well, I think. And then you have the interesting dynamics inside Turkey, where, of course, the opposition, for the first time ever, got more votes than his party, which is quite significant, and took all the major mayor positions.
Being in Greece, let me finish with a couple of questions on Greece.
Yep.
How do you assess the relationship between the two countries? I mean, it's been over a decade.
U.S. and Greece?
The U.S. and Greece.
Fantastic.
And the role of Greece.
It's even more so, actually.
Okay, you have the floor.
No, I mean, you know, you have Suda Bay.
Suda Bay.
Look, what are we doing in the Eastern Mediterranean? It's all about Suda Bay. What's the port in the north? Is it
Alexandroupolis.
Alexandroupolis. I mean, again, this has emerged. In fact, the chief of defense staff's right here. And we sat down last year, looked at the map, how, you know, all of that. Look at the natural gas interconnectors. Oh, look, there's a host of really positive developments here, not to mention the fact that there's stability and governance for the first time, and an economy that's growing at least 1 or 2% more than the rest of the European Union. I've been talking actually to startups out here. I mean, there's even a startup scene. And again, KKR is not in Greece right now. We got to take a closer look. So there's an awful lot of positive developments here. And they relate also to the U.S. relationship with Greece, Greece's position in the EU, Greece's geostrategic position, its geoeconomic position, and again, stable governance for another, 4 years or so that we can look forward to. And it's brought Greece back.
Actually,
What did I miss, Ambassador? Any other points that you want me to make? He had his hand up my back, making my lips work.
On that happy note, actually, I'm being told that we have to finish. So, the ambassador has to add the point. He always has to add the point. I mean,
it's a
you know.
relationship that's based on values and principles that is not transactional.
Exactly right. Values and principles, not transactional.
Good point.
On that note,
On
thank
that
you all
note,
very much.
Thank you very much.